Good morning everyone. Myself Sandhya Pandey from Jagan Public School. Students, today we will start new chapter from your English book, that is Pride and Prejudice. This is your chapter 10 from your English book, New Images. So students, when we'll start the chapter, about the chapter, it is one of the most universally beloved and admired English novels. Pride and Prejudice was spent as a popular entertainment, but the consummate artistry of Jane Austen student transformed this ever-vision tale of rural romance into a witty, shrewdly observed satire of English country life in 1800s. Okay, Jane Austen was the author of the chapter. And actually, students, in this chapter, marriage is an inevitable fact of life for the five Bennet sisters: Jane, Elizabeth, Mary, and Kitty and Lydia. And this chapter is all about Mrs. Bennet and her daughter's marriage. How she is worried about her daughter's marriage. She can do anything for her daughter's marriage. She was desperate for her daughter's marriage. This chapter is all about, students. So if we will start this chapter, students, the news that a wealthy young gentleman named Charles Bingley has rented the manor of Netherfield Park caused a great stir in the nearby village of Longbourn, especially in the Bennet household. The Bennet have five unmarried daughters, from oldest to youngest: Jane, Elizabeth, Mary, Kitty, and Lydia, and Mrs. Bennet is desperate to see them all married. After Mr. Bennet pays a social visit to Mr. Bingley, the Bennet attends a ball at which Mr. Bingley is present. He is taken with Jane and spends much of the evening dance with her. His close friend Mr. Darcy is less pleased with the evening and hotly refuses to dance with Elizabeth, which makes everyone view him as an arrogant obnoxious. So, students, at social functions over subsequent weeks, however, Mr. Darcy finds himself increasingly attracted to Elizabeth's charm and intelligence. Jane's friendship with Mr. Bingley also continues to bury on, and Jane pays a visit to the Bingley mansion. On her journey to the house, she is caught in a downpour and catches ill. That our chapter is all about. Only 2 or 3 parts of the chapter is given in this from your story. So Pride and Prejudice is a whole novel, student. But in your class, only a scene is there. A scene is there. So we will discuss the whole chapter so that you will go through all the chapters and you will enjoy Pride and Prejudice. So she was caught ill, and she was forced her to stay at Netherfield for several days. So in order to tend to Jane, Elizabeth hikes through muddy field and arrives with spattered dress, much to the disdain of the snowish Miss Bingley, Charles Bingley's sister. Miss Bingley's spite only increases when she notices that Darcy, whom she is pursuing, pay quite a bit of attention to Elizabeth. When Elizabeth and Jane return home, they find Mr. Collins visiting their household. Mr. Collins is a young clergyman who is tend to inherit Mr. Bennet's property, which has been entailed, meaning that it can only be passed down to male heirs. Mr. Collins is a pompous type of a fool, and though he is quite enthralled by the Bennet girls, shortly after his arrival, he makes a proposal of marriage to Elizabeth. She turns him down, wounding his pride. Meanwhile, the Bennet girls have become friendly with militia officers staying in nearby town. Among them is Wickham, a handsome young soldier who is friendly toward Elizabeth and tells her how Darcy cruelly cheated him out of an inheritance. Okay, so at the beginning of winter, students, the Bingley and Darcy leave Netherfield on return to London, much to Jane's dismay. And a further shock arrives with the news that Mr. Collins has become engaged to Charlotte Lucas. She was Elizabeth's best friend and the poor daughter of a local knight. Charlotte explains to Elizabeth that she is getting older and needs to wait for the financial reasons. And Charlotte and Mr. Collins get married, and Elizabeth promises to visit them at their new home. As winter possesses students, Jane visits the city to see friends, hoping that also she might see Mr. Bingley. However, Miss Bingley visits her and behaves rudely, while Mr. Beale, the marriage prospects of the Bennet girls, appear bleak. Now, that spring, students. That spring, Elizabeth visits Charlotte, who now lives near the home of Mr. Collins' patron, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, who is also Darcy's auntie. Darcy calls on Lady Catherine and encounters Elizabeth, whose presence leads him to make a number of visits to the Collins home, which she is staying. One day, he makes a marriage which Elizabeth quickly refuses. She tells Darcy that she considers him arrogant and unpleasant, that scolds him for steering Bingley away from Jane and is inheriting Wickham. Darcy leaves her, but shortly thereafter delivers a letter to her. In this letter, he admits that he urged Bingley to distance himself from Jane, but claimed that he did so only because he thought that romance was not serious. So, students, so this was the story. And a little later, Elizabeth and Darcy go out for walking together, and he tells her that his feelings have not altered since the spring. She tenderly accepts his proposal, and both Jane and Elizabeth were married. So, if we will talk about student chapter characters, in this character, students, Elizabeth Bennet, Darcy, Jane Bennet, Charles Bingley. These are the main characters. First, we will talk about Miss Elizabeth Bennet. The novel's protagonist, the second daughter of Mr. Bennet, Elizabeth is the most intelligent and sensible of the five Bennet sisters. She is well-read and quick-witted, with a tongue that occasionally proves too sharp for her own good. Her realization of Darcy's essential goodness eventually triumphs over her initial prejudice against him. Fitzwilliam Darcy, a wealthy gentleman, the master of Pemberley and the nephew of Lady Catherine de Bourgh. Though Darcy is intelligent and honest, his excess of pride causes him to look down on his social inferiors. Over the course of the novel, he tempers his class consciousness and learns to admire and love Elizabeth for her strong character. Jane Bennet, students, the eldest and the most beautiful Janet sister. Janet is more reserved and gentle than Elizabeth. The easy unpleasantness with which she and Bingley interact contrasts starkly with the mutual distaste that marks the encounter between Elizabeth and Darcy. Charles Bingley, Darcy's considerably wealthy best friend, Bingley's purchase of Netherfield and estate near the Bennets, and serves as the impetus for the novel. He is a gentle, well-intentioned gentleman whose easygoing nature contrasts with Darcy's initially discourteous demeanor. He is blissfully uncaring about class differences. Now, Mr. Bennet, the patriarch of the Bennet family, a gentleman of modest income, as he was not wealthy, as we have discussed it earlier. He was having 5 unmarried daughters. And Mr. Bennet has a sarcastic, cynical sense of humor that he uses to purposely irritate his wife. Though he loves his daughter, Elizabeth in particular, he often feels as a parent preferring to withdraw from the never-ending marriage concerns of the women around him rather than offer Mrs. Bennet. As according to others, she was a foolish lady, noisy woman whose only goal in life is to see her daughter married. Because of her low breeding and often unbecoming behavior, Mrs. Bennet often repels the various suitors whom she tries to attract for her daughters. George Wickham, a handsome fortune-hunting military officer, becomes good looks and charm attracts Elizabeth initially. But Darcy's revelation about Wickham's disputable past clutches her into her true nature and simultaneously draws her closer to Darcy. Now, Lydia Bennet, the youngest Bennet sister, she is gossipy, immature, and self-imposed. Unlike Elizabeth, Lydia flings herself headlong into romance and ends up running off with Vic. Now, Mr. Collins, a pompous, generally idiotic clergyman who stands to inherit Mr. Bennet's property. Mr. Collins' own social status is nothing to brag about, but he takes great pains to let everyone and anyone know that Lady Catherine de Bourgh serves as his patroness. He is the worst combination of snobbish and Miss Bingley. Miss Bingley is Snobby's sister. Miss Bingley bears inordinate disdain for Elizabeth's middle-class background. Her vain attempts to garner Darcy's attention caused Darcy to admire Elizabeth's self-possessed character even more. Lady Catherine, a rich, bossy, noble woman, Mr. Collins' patron and Darcy's aunt. Lady Catherine epitomized class snobbery, especially in her attempts to order the middle-class Elizabeth away from her well-bred nephew. Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner, Mr. Bennet's brother and his wife, caring, nurturing, and full of common sense, often proved to better parents to the Bennet daughters than Mr. Bennet and his wife. Charlotte Lucas, Elizabeth's dear friend, pragmatic, where Elizabeth is romantic, and also 6 years older than Elizabeth. Charlotte does not view love as the most vital component of a marriage. She is more interested in having a comfortable home. Thus, so students, we were talking about Charlotte Lucas. She was a dear friend of Elizabeth, and she was very pragmatic, where Elizabeth is romantic and also 6 years older than Elizabeth. Charlotte does not view the love as the most vital component of a marriage. She is much more interested in having a comfortable home. Thus, when Mr. Collins proposed, she accepts. Georgiana Darcy, she is Darcy's sister. She is immensely pretty and just as shy. She has a great skill at playing the pianoforte. Now, Mary Bennet, the middle Bennet sister, bookish and pedantic. Under Catherine Bennet, the fourth Bennet sister, like Lydia, she is girlishly enthralled with the soldier. So, students, this was a chapter about Mrs. Bennet, as she was worried for her daughter's marriage, and the story goes on, and how Janet, how Jane, and how Mr. Bingley has met, how Darcy and Elizabeth met. This chapter is all about, and how Mrs. Bennet's concern for her daughter's marriage finally vanished, and they both were well settled with the grooms, and the story goes on, students. This is a really nice story. Please watch this. Please see the whole story. So please listen the story very patiently, and you'll enjoy. Surely you will enjoy. Thank you so much for listening, students. Have a nice day. Stay at home. Stay safe. Thank you so much for listening. We'll meet in our next class. Thank you so much, students.